This is the Troutbitten Podcast.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Yeah, Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
It's about trout. Wild trout. This is Troutbitten. Welcome to the Troutbitten Podcast, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Dominic Swantowski, the owner of Troutbitten and the author of Troutbitten.com. I'm here to introduce a new format to the Troutbitten Podcast. This second season is a mini-series of connected episodes that build out specific tactics. It's what I call a Troutbitten Skills series. These episodes are short, deeply tactical, and packed with the how-tos of just one technique. There's no question and answer round up front, and there's not much conversation here, just a sharing of information that gets to the heart of the method at hand. Each episode is sort of intertwined or woven together with the others that surround it. By the end of this skills series, you'll have a detailed picture of the tactics and hopefully a thorough understanding of what's possible on the water. Think of a Troutbitten Skills series as a course in one topic or one aspect of fly fishing, with different sections that eventually build a full set of knowledge. I believe these episodes are for everyone, but they'll probably connect most with the intermediate and advanced angler. There's a lot of supporting article content on the Troutbitten website, and the podcast series sort of goes hand in hand with those articles. I should mention that later in the winter, we'll get back to the Season 1 podcast format of conversation and discussion with a full panel of my friends, because we all love that too. That'll be Season 3, and we're looking forward to it. But this skills series format allows for some intense exploration of what makes fly rod tactics work. And through the next few seasons and years, I think we'll keep this platform in the mix. All right, so what about the topic for the first skills series? The Troutbitten website features some series-style writing, like chapters in a book, and I recently finished the last article in one of my favorite series. After 6 months, I published the final piece on the 9 essential skills for tight line and Euro nymphing. And that is the topic for this first Troutbitten Skills series. 9 skills, 9 podcasts. We'll talk about it. We'll expand on the written ideas and break down the details of each of those skills. So I'm here with my longtime friend and Troutbitten guide, Austin Dando. What's up, buddy?
Hey, how we doing?
Doing well. Did you fish today?
No, but I fished 2 days ago.
There you go. How'd it go?
It was good. Got to explore some new water, which was part of the New Year's resolution, so it's a good start to the new year. Nice.
You going to catch up with Bill, get 100 streams in 1 year?
I don't think well, you never know.
No, none of us have that kind of time.
I won't say it, but I don't think I have the time.
No. I was out today. I'll tell you, interestingly, this winter so far, I've had to go smaller and smaller. Some of the standard stuff's working, but some of my most standard stuff, unexpectedly, is a little slow. But man, when I go smaller, like 18s, 20s,
yeah,
on that tag and running that tag low on that nymph, been doing unexpectedly better. Maybe that's just the last week, but we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah, good stuff.
Hey, are you ready to talk about some tactics?
Yeah, man, let's do it.
All right. Before we really dig into the nuts and bolts, we should start here with a solid understanding of these rigs. And Austin, will you briefly tell us about tight line and Euro nymphing?
Sure. So tight line and Euro nymphing is super popular right now.
Yeah.
Anglers love the contact and the control they have over those flies. Knowing where your fly is and dictating its path all the way through the drift, it keeps us fishing and rather than just hoping. On a tight line, we stop guessing what's going on with those nymphs under the water because we know where and how the nymphs are drifting. All that contact and control, of course, leads to more trout in the net, which is great.
Yeah, nice.
Catching fish provides more chances to learn. If you fool a trout and you get a chance to understand why those trout ate your fly, and then we dial in the water type, the depth, the presentation, speed, and more things like that. Mm-hmm. And we think it's that learning, that mystery, and that problem solving that attracts so many anglers to the fly rod and to tight line tactics in particular. It's an efficient system and it's really fun, but tight line and Euro nymphing is misunderstood too.
Yeah.
The many different rigs and methods of casting or delivery are what make all of this so interesting. But it's what leads to confusion and mistaken concepts about what this is and how to get it done.
Yeah.
The skill series addresses all of that. It covers the 9 essential skills for tightline and Euro nymphing. These concepts and skills truly set the base for every other variation that follows. Want to add an indie to a tightline and indicator style? Want to fish streamers on a mono rig or a tightline dry dropper? These 9 skills are critical. They're the foundation for everything else. What's more, understanding these skills in depth is what allows the advanced angler to make decisions, to adapt their own rig, to make leader adjustments, select heavier or stiffer material for a butt section. They could choose a split shot over weighted flies or carry 4-weight fly rod rather than a 3-weight. With deep knowledge, by knowing these skills inside and out, we have the key to the map, sort of the cheat code for the game.
The cheat code. Nice. So that's a good overview of tightline tactics. All right, so this first Troutbitten Skills series is about the 9 essential skills for tightline and Euro nymphing. And here they are. Here's all 9. Angle and approach. That's what we're going to cover today. Turnover and tuck casting. Sticking the landing. Recovering slack. Finding contact. Locating the strike zone. Guiding the flies. The strike. And then putting it all together. All right, so there you go. Each of those 9 skills has its own episode. And the series begins right here with number 1, angle and approach. All right, so I believe that most listeners tuning in probably have a good idea about what a monorig, a tightline system, or Euro nymphing is. But let's define the terms a little bit. My friends and I call our favorite tightline system a monorig because we use monofilament to do what a fly line can do, but with much less drag in the system. So it's a tightline rig, a leader, long enough to keep the fly line on the spool or at least not out of the rod guides. We don't call it Euro nymphing all the time because we use tactics other than that. Euro nymphing is a tightline system with nothing attached to the leader but the flies themselves. And while that's a great way to fish, it's also limiting because we also use split shot sometimes and we attach indicators plenty of times. We fish all types of streamers on this system too. Versatility is the key. The Troutbitten Standard Mono Rig, as we call it, is built for working with all of that. And last point here, we use a butt section that is thick enough to cast and push things around. Although we occasionally employ the specialized tools of thin and micro-thin leaders, our standard rig is built for fly line style casting and not just lobbing weights around. And that is extremely important for versatility. We're going to talk about that casting style in episode 2. If you'd like more information about the monorig or about tightline and Euro nymphing systems, I have 2 resources for you before we get started. First, you can find hundreds of articles on Troutbitten in the menu under Articles. Also, the guys and I did a podcast in episode 4 of season 1 titled Fly Fishing the Monorig, Versatility and the Tightline Advantage Taken Further. Right, Austin?
That's right.
That was a good one.
Yep.
All right, so let's get into the meat of things here. Let's get going. The first critical skill of tightline and Euro nymphing is angle and approach. Now let's talk about it. How far away are we casting, Austin?
Not too far.
Right.
One of the best things we can do when, especially first starting out, is kind of limit our range that we're casting.
Yeah.
We start casting too long, too soon. All the stuff that we're trying to dial in gets harder and harder to do. So that natural range is about 2 to 3 times the length of the rod, I'd say.
Yeah, I think 30 feet, 25, 35 is really starting to push it. And I would also say people tend to really overestimate or underestimate how far they're really casting. So, you can grab your line, measure it against your 10-foot rod, if that's what you have, and go, okay, I have 10 feet out to the rod tip and then 10 feet back, and now an extra 4 feet there, so I'm casting 24 feet. I have 24 feet of maximum reach, And that's kind of how I measure things out. But yeah, if you limit that range, because if you go too far too soon, it's hard to learn it too, right?
Yeah. And we have this natural tendency, I think, as people to want to keep reaching because it gets fun, maybe exciting or something. But the further we go, the less accurate we get too, right?
Oh, for sure.
Those things that we learn at close range kind of pay dividends when we want to try to cast a little further.
I mean, I think every sport is like that. You're not trying to hit the home run first. You're just trying to hit the ball.
That's a good way to put it.
I mean, really, everything, learn it close, learn the small things. Learn the fundamentals, and then you can, build on that and take it further. And even when I start having trouble, on the stream, or if I'm not feeling dialed in, I will really limit myself to, 20 feet, 2 rod lengths away.
Yeah.
Like you said, that natural range is kind of like 2 to 3 times the length of the rod. And I've started saying it that way because if you're fishing with a 11-foot rod, your range is longer than mine because I like a 10-foot rod, Yep. And the next guy might be fishing an 8.5-foot rod. That's what I started with. I fished an 8.5-foot rod for 5 years on all this tight line stuff. Yeah. And so that's a dramatically different range. It's more than just a couple feet. You factor in all the angles. You can reach a lot further with an 11-foot rod than an 8.5.
Absolutely. Yeah, no doubt about that.
So that long distance, if you try to go too far and take this to too long of a distance, it takes away that tight line advantage. And really, let me define that, I guess. What I call a tight line advantage is when you can keep line up and off of the water. That's essentially what we're trying to do here. Everything that touches the water drags. Everything that goes under the water drags even more. So the tight line advantage is keeping things up and out of the water. Everything that we possibly can.
Yeah.
If you start to fish further away, you take that tight line advantage away from you. You might have sag happening from the leader. You might have to lay line on the water. That tight line advantage is very much, it's not an advantage anymore,
Yeah, totally.
It's best to learn everything close before going long. I should mention, too, we talked a little bit about leaders in just kind of describing what all of this is. All of these 9 essential skills apply to every style of leader, even if you're fishing a micro thin or a thin leader, or if you're fishing sort of this standard, what I call standard, this 20-pound, or if you're fishing a 15-pound butt section. All of these skills translate absolutely to each style of leader.
Yeah.
Now, some of them, we're going to get to tuck casting in the next episode, and tuck casting is better performed with a more powerful leader. But yeah, all of these skills translate.
For sure. All building blocks, no matter what style you use.
Mm-hmm. Hey, what direction do we fish in?
Broadly speaking, upstream.
Yeah.
When we're fishing a tight line system, that's what we want to do because we're looking for drag-free drifts. Mm-hmm. And the way to attain that is to cast upstream of ourselves and fish it back to us.
Yeah, the drag-free stuff only happens when you can keep things in one seam. And the only way to really keep things drag-free in one seam is if you're working upstream. And we don't necessarily mean directly upstream. Let's talk about the angles.
Yeah.
I like to cast upstream and over 1 rod length.
Right on.
So I might cast upstream 25 feet, but only over, let's say 10 feet. Put a little bit of arm length in there. So over 12 feet. Okay. I don't really like to reach too far. Yeah. So upstream 25 and over 12. And that's kind of your perfect angle of approach, Yeah.
When I think about it, I only cast as far or reach as far as what the flies will come back to my rod tip as. Mm-hmm. If they start tracking outside my reach of my rod tip, then I know that drift is no longer drag free.
Yeah.
So I only cast as far as what my flies will come back to myself.
They are always tracking toward your rod tip. On a tight line, that's perhaps the most important thing to understand is that they are going to track toward your rod tip. And it doesn't matter what kind of leader you're using. If you use a very, very thin leader, yes, they will track. They'll track less toward. There will be less pull toward your rod. There'll be less sag. That also depends on how far out you're going. At like 15 feet, it doesn't matter. The leader doesn't matter. Even at 20 feet, quite honestly, I don't think the leader matters. But yeah, as you get further out there, it's even more important then not to go further across than what your rod tip can reach. Hey, you guide. You and I both guide a lot, and this 45 degree to 45 degree thing that everybody seems to want to do. Wherever they see that they want to cast, they often go right across from it.
Right.
Wherever they think the fish is, they often go right across from it. So then they'll cast 45 degrees up from it, drift past the fish, and then end their drift 45 degrees downstream. Now, if we do that the whole time, that fly is, again, tracking toward our rod tip.
Yep. Like I said earlier, I think we have a tendency to want to reach further and further, and I especially see that probably most is when we're guiding.
So instead of that 45 to 45, we want to cast, again, upstream 2 rod lengths and then over 1 rod length. If you go 45 to 45 and you actually watch where the fly went in and then look where it comes out, you will see that your fly made progress across seams toward you and toward your rod tip 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 feet sometimes. And I'll often point that out to people. Sometimes I'll grab the rod and say, okay, watch me do it. If I go 45 to 45, now watch the splash of the nymph and watch how the whole time you can see it's crossing seams, crossing seams, crossing seams. Is that a dead drift? No. I mean, no, it's not a dead drift. Will they eat it sometimes? Absolutely.
Right.
You know, and some days they'll even eat it better than a dead drift, but those are rare days and rare fish. On picky fish, in most wild trout situations, you need that one seam dead drift, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that should be our baseline anyway, our baseline angle and approach, you know, that upstream 2 rod lengths and over 1.
Yeah.
If I'm to just generalize it, that's what it is. Upstream 2 rod lengths, 20 to 25 feet, and then over 1 rod length, 10 to 12 feet, you know? And then you drift back down, talk about this. How far should we let the flies come downstream? When do we pick them up?
Pretty much, I mean, the sweet spot of your drift really is when the flies get to you. And as soon as they're past you, it's pretty much over.
Yeah.
So as soon as the flies are downstream of you, it doesn't take much of just being slightly below you. They'll start to swing and track out of those lanes again. And if we're fishing upstream, that stuff that we're drifting past ourselves, we've already fished correctly through.
Yeah, I already fished that.
So unless it's some special occasion where we've got emerging bugs and they're really keen on a swing, and that's great. Sometimes that happens and they'll eat it. When flies are starting to lift or drag some way funny. But most of the times out of the year, we're not dealing with that. We're dealing with natural drag-free presentations. So after we get done with that drift coming across ourselves and starting to reach below our position, we pick them up, set them into the next cast, and move our way upstream.
Right on. Yeah, and you said the sweet spot of your drift. And we're going to talk more about this in episodes that are coming up. We're going to talk about the strike zone and how to recognize that strike zone and how to tuck cast and get your flies down into that strike zone sooner. And you can really maximize that sweet spot of your drift by learning how to allow the flies to drop into that strike zone. So you don't have to wait for them to drop. I will often meet people that say, well, I have to cast far because those flies have to have a chance to drop. That's just not true. I know, and we're going to address that in future podcasts. So in general, we're working upstream, and we're not fishing past our position. Like you said, when that fly gets right across from me or beyond my position, again, you can watch it. You can see, well, that's when it's going to start tracking toward the rod tip. And your rod tip has to start, kind of coming out of that lane. So it starts pulling the flies out of that lane.
Can only lead them so far.
Yeah. You can lift those flies and do all that stuff, looking like emerging caddis. Great if it's that kind of day, and if they're hitting it, do it. But again, our baseline approach, our essential skill of this angle and approach is upstream, and pick it up. We're just using half of the drift, but boy, it's the good half. That back half, start thinking about it. Am I catching anything downstream of me? If you're not, then just use that upside of the drift. That's generally what we do,
Yep, great points.
We all know that having the right fly is another piece to the puzzle, and that's where Fulling Mill comes in. The Tactical Anchor Collection from Fulling Mill is designed to give tightline and Euro nymphing anglers their favorite confidence flies, but with the extra control they need for the perfect drift. As such, each pattern is offered with multiple bead sizes per hook size, and that's a unique advantage. Every pattern is backed by the 200% Fulling Mill guarantee. If a fly isn't up to the highest standards that you expect, they will replace it with 2 that are. Stock up at fullingmill.com or ask for their flies at your local dealer.
Tactical Fly Fisher was started in 2015 by Fly Fishing Team USA angler Devin Olson, with a mission to bring American anglers the techniques and gear that dominate the international competitive fly fishing scene. While you may have no desire to compete, you can still benefit from the same strategies which competitive anglers use to make them more successful on the water. Whether you want to buy a Euro nymphing rod, a stillwater fly line, or just some hooks and beads to fill your fly box, we've got you covered. And our teaching materials will help you learn how to use whatever products fill up your cart. Head on over to thetacticalflyfisher.com and use the code TFF10 to get 10% off flies, fly tying supplies, or terminal tackle. So, all this is great, but if we really want to achieve that best angle for ourselves, we often have to wade in position. So the other topic here is to wade more as a fisherman. All this means that there's a fairly limited range of distance and angles that gets the most out of a tightline rig.
Yeah. Yeah, if you really want that one seam approach, you have to wade a lot. If you're on a tight line rig and you're not going to add an indie and you really do want a dead drift, you're going to have to wade quite a bit. You know, a tight line angler is a wading angler, and somebody who's willing to move into those perfect positions, really. You can push it. You can cast further across than one rod length. But if you really start paying attention, you're going to notice that your success rate goes down.
Right on.
The more that those flies are tracking and coming across seams, the fewer fish are going to buy it. So we wade a lot. Instead of casting further, we don't cast across. We wade more, you know?
Yeah. Fish as close as you can. Mm-hmm. I catch myself doing that sometimes too, or maybe I'll get lazy or tired and I won't want to push into the next riffle. I have to remind myself that the drifts that I'm offering those fish are not really worth very much. And, you know, get closer to the fish. If you're able to get closer to the fish, do it.
Yeah. Well, you got to stay disciplined, you know?
Yeah.
And a lot of this is really just thinking about what we're doing and remaining not just hopeful, but knowing that if we do things right, that we'll catch more fish. And then by catching more fish, we learn more, and then we know how to catch more fish after that.
Right on.
You know, and but staying disciplined and fishing then only what you can reach or you can get great drifts in. I mean, if you can cast, 30 feet over to that bank and across the stream, great. Okay. But are they going to eat it? Probably not, you know?
Right.
That said, I mean, as I'm wading upstream, there's plenty of casts that I take. I go, I'm just going to shoot one over there and just let them see it. I say that all the time, like, just let them see it. Okay, it's not going to be a perfect drift, overhanging brush, or the wading is too difficult. Throw it over there, get it on that soft side or the inside seam, and let them see it. Okay, you know, just because I can't get a perfect drift doesn't mean I'm going to ignore it. But I'm going to spend most of the day wading, getting into that perfect angle, and having that perfect approach, upstream, 2 rod lengths, and over 1, generally, you know.
Right on.
All right, so really last point here. We have to find our water to learn all of this in. We've talked a lot about staying close, you know, being disciplined, learning things close so we can take them eventually further away. But you also want to find the right water type. We do not recommend fishing pools and flats to start out tight line nymphing. Or if you're trying to refine one aspect of these 9 skills we're going to talk about, don't choose pools. Don't do it in a pool. Don't even do it in a slow flat, you know. Choose riffles and runs and pocket water. Avoid those pools and long flats for learning or refining any of this stuff. Trout like moving water. They like the riffles and the runs because, you know, the nymphs need that extra oxygen. When trout want to eat, I mean, dude, they go into the, right? They're in moving water. So we like to fish there.
Yeah, and a lot of what this comes down to is having fun too, right?
Right.
So if we can set ourselves up in the best water to learn and catch fish quicker, we're going to be more apt to want to go do it again and keep learning. So don't handicap yourself and putting yourself in some unfavorable water right out of the gate. Yeah,
and you know, I think flats and pools, that slower water takes a certain kind of patience.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and especially if you're trying to refine something, like you said, it's a lot more fun in that moving water where your drifts aren't 20 seconds long, 25 seconds, 30 seconds long. Yeah, you're banging it in there. You're getting yourself a 15, 20-foot drift, and boom, you're taking it out, putting it right back in. And over and over, we're trying to make the best drift in one seam. And when we see that, then we'll move on. Yeah, we're going to talk about that stuff in future episodes of this Essential Skills series. It's kind of exciting.
Yeah.
Anything else, Austin?
Maybe something good to mention right off the start here is the type of rods that we might use for this type of skill. You don't need a specialized rod, but you know, if you're going to try it, between a 3 and 5 weight, 8.5 to 10-foot rod, pretty good to start out on.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. We don't need a specialized rod, but I don't want to use a 7-foot rod for this, you know?
Yeah.
The extra reach is nice.
Yep.
We also don't need a very specialized tool of an 11-foot 2 weight. And you can do a lot of things with a versatile rod. We'll get into some of that later in this series too. All right, friends, so that's number 1, angle and approach. You should know there's a companion article for each of these episodes, and you can find the full series of articles over at troutbitten.com. I'll include that direct link in the show notes. The next skill is about delivering the fly. It's about turnover and tuck casting. So look for that in your Troutbitten podcast feed. Also, there are 9 episodes in this Essential Skills series, so subscribe to the Troutbitten podcast and follow along. Remember, troutbitten.com is a free resource for all anglers. With over 800 articles, there are stories, commentaries, tactics, tips, and more. Find what you like through the top menu and through the search page. Navigate by way of the categories and tags too. Thank you for listening to the Troutbitten Podcast. Please give the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and leave a comment because that really helps. Until next time, friends, fish hard, enjoy the day, and find your life on the water.